Hi, and welcome to Fourth Wall Theater Company's Holiday Storytime. We're so glad you could join us. I'm 𝗘𝗃𝗀𝗚.
And I'm Kim Tobin-Lehl.
And we are the co-artistic directors of Fourth Wall Theater Company. First, we want to thank our sponsor for Holiday Storytime, the Liberty Group. Thank you, Liberty Group. Ho, ho, ho!
This is the first of 4 episodes of Holiday Storytime, and we hope you'll find the stories heartwarming and funny, just like we did. And they're filled with a number of stories, and most of them we think you will not have heard, so we hope you'll tune in.
So sit back and relax and enjoy this installment of Holiday Storytime. And remember, we'll be here each Thursday night through Christmas Eve at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. Thank you, and happy holidays!
Happy holidays!
Hi, thank you for joining us. I'm Eboni Bell, and I will be reading The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. $1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such dealings implied. 3 times Della counted. $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl, so Della did it, which instigated the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 a week. It was not exactly beggar description, but it certainly was close. In the vestibule below was a letter box into which no letters would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity when the possessor had been paid $30 a week. Now, when the income was shrinking to $20, they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with the powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking on a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she only had $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months with this result. $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling, something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being loved by Jim. There was pier glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing his reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal stripes, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della had mastered the art. Suddenly she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brightly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly she pulled her hair down and let it fall to its full length. Now, there are 2 possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would let her hair hang out the window some day to dry, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor with his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knees and made itself almost a garment for her, and then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still while a tear or 2 splashed on the worn red carpet. On went her old brown jacket. On went her old brown hat. With a swirl of skirts and with a brilliant sparkle still in her eye, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Mademoiselle Sofronie, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up, Della ran and collected herself, panting. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take off your hat and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by meretricious ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew it must be Jim's. It was like him. Quietness and value. The description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might have been properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly, on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling iron and lighted the gas and went to work preparing the ravages made by generosity added to love, which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look woefully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror long, carefully, and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? What could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della doubled the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door that he always entered. Then she heard his steps on the stairs, away down on the first flight. She turned white for just a moment. She had a habit of saying a silent little prayer about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, please God, make him still think I'm pretty. The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. At only 22, he always put his family first, and you could see by the fact that he needed a new overcoat and was without gloves even in this cold. Jim stopped inside the door, as immovable as a setter at the scent of quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the other sentiments she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wiggled off the table and went for him. Jim, darling, she cried, don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you. You've cut off your hair, said Jim, laboriously, as if he had not arrived at that patent fact yet even after the hardest mental labor. Cut it off and sold it, said Della. Don't you like me just as well anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I? Jim looked about the room curiously. You say your hair is gone, he said, with an air of almost idiocy. You needn't look for it, said Della. It's sold, I tell you, sold and gone, too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs on my head were numbered, she went on with a sudden serious sweetness. But nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim? Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded Della. For 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year. What's the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated later on. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake, Dell," he said, "about me. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you'll see why you had me going for a while at first." White fingers and Nimble tore at the string paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the Lord of the Flat. For there lay the combs, the set of combs side and back that Della had worshipped long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoiseshell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the slightest hope of possession. And now they were hers, but the hair that should have adorned the coveted adornments were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," he said, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them a while. They're too nice to be used just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now I suppose you put the chops on." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, probably bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two are the wisest. Of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are the wisest. Everywhere they are wisest. They are Magi. The end.
Hi there. Good to have you with us. My name is Juan Sebastián Cruz, and today I'll be reading A Chaparral Christmas Gift by O. Henry. The original cause of the trouble was about 20 years in growing. At the end of that time, it was worth it. Had you lived anywhere within 50 miles of Sundown Ranch, you would have heard of it. It possessed a quantity of jet black hair, a pair of extremely frank, deep brown eyes, and a laugh that rippled across the prairie like the sound of a hidden brook. The name of it was Rosita McMullen, and she was the daughter of Old Man McMullen of the Sundown Sheep Ranch. There came riding on red roan steeds, or to be more explicit, on a paint and flea-bitten sorrel, two wooers. One was Madison Lane, and the other was the Frio Kid. But at that time, they did not call him the Frio Kid, for he had not earned the honors of special nomenclature. His name was simply Johnny McRoy. It must not be supposed that these two were the sum of the agreeable Rosita's admirers. The broncos of a dozen others champed their bits at the long hitching rack of the Sundown Ranch. Many were the sheep's eyes that were cast in those savannas that did not belong to the flocks of Dan McMullen. But of all the cavaliers, Madison Lane and Johnny McRoy galloped far ahead, wherefore they are to be chronicled. Madison Lane, a young cattleman from the Nueces country, won the race. He and Rosita were married one Christmas day. Armed, hilarious, vociferous, magnanimous, The cowmen and the sheepmen, laying aside their hereditary hatred, joined forces to celebrate the occasion. Sundown Ranch was sonorous with the crackling of jokes and six-shooters, the shine of buckles and bright eyes, the outspoken congratulations of the herders of kine. But while the wedding feast was at its liveliest, there descended upon it Johnny McRoy, bitten by jealousy like one possessed. "I'll give you a Christmas present," he yelled shrilly at the door, with his .45 in his hand. Even then, he had some reputation as an offhand shot. His first bullet cut a neat underbit in Madison Lane's right ear. The barrel of his gun moved an inch. The next shot would have been the bride's had not Carson, a sheepman, possessed a mind with triggers somewhat well-oiled and in repair. The guns of the wedding party had been hung in their belts upon nails in the wall where they sat at table, as a concession to good taste. But Carson, with great promptness, hurled his plate of roast venison and frijoles at McRoy, spoiling his aim. The second bullet, then, only shattered the white petals of a Spanish dagger flower suspended 2 feet above Rosita's head. The guests spurned their chairs and jumped for their weapons. It was considered an improper act to shoot the bride and groom at a wedding. In about 6 seconds, there were about 20 or so bullets due to be whizzing in the direction of Mr. McRoy. "I'll shoot better next time," yelled Johnny, "and there'll be a next time." He backed rapidly out the door. Carson, the sheepman, spurred on to attempt further exploits by the success of his plate throwing, was first to reach the door. McRoy's bullet from the darkness laid him low. The cattleman then swept out upon him, calling for vengeance, for, while the slaughter of a sheepman was not always lacked condonement, it was a decided misdemeanor in this instance. Carson was innocent. He was no accomplice at the matrimonial proceedings, nor had anyone heard him quote the line, "Christmas comes but once a year," to the guests. But the sortie failed in its vengeance. McRoy was on his horse and away, shouting back curses and threats as he galloped into the concealing chaparral. That night was the birthnight of the Frio Kid. He became the bad man of that portion of the state. The rejection of his suit by Miss McMullen turned him into a dangerous man. When officers went after him for the shooting of Carson, he killed 2 of them and entered upon the life of an outlaw. He became a marvelous shot with either hand. He would turn up in towns and settlements, raise a quarrel at the slightest opportunity, pick off his man, and laugh at the officers of the law. He was so cool, so deadly, so rapid, so inhumanely bloodthirsty that none but faint attempts were ever made to capture him. When he was at last shot and killed by a little one-armed Mexican who was nearly dead himself from fright, the Frio Kid had the deaths of 18 men on his head. About half of these were killed in fair duels depending upon the quickness of the draw. The other half were men whom he assassinated from absolute wantonness and cruelty. Many tales are told along the border of his impudent courage and daring, but he was not one of the breed of desperadoes who have seasons of generosity and even of softness. They say he never had mercy on the object of his anger. Yet at this and every Christmastide, it is well to give each one credit, if it can be done, for whatever speck of good he may have possessed. If the Frio Kid ever did a kindly act or felt a throb of generosity in his heart, it was once at such a time and season, and this is the way it happened. One who has been crossed in love should never breathe the odor from the blossoms of the ratama tree. It stirs the memory to a dangerous degree. One December, in the Frio country, there was a ratama tree in full bloom, for the winter had been as warm as springtime. That way rode the Frio Kid and his satellite, a co-murderer, Mexican Frank. The kid reined in his Mustang and sat in his saddle, thoughtful and grim, with dangerously narrowing eyes. The rich, sweet scent touched him somewhere beneath his ice and iron. "I don't know what I've been thinking about, Mex," he remarked in his usual mild drawl. "I forgot all about a Christmas present I got to give. I'm gonna ride over tomorrow night and shoot Madison Lane in his own house. He got my girl. Rosita would have had me if he hadn't cut into the game. I wonder why I happened to overlook it up to now." "Aw, shucks, kid," said Mexican. "Don't talk foolishness. You know you can't get within a mile of Mad Lane's house tomorrow night. I see old man Allen day before yesterday, and he says Mad is going to have Christmas doings at his house. You remember how you shot up the festivities when Mad was married, and about the threats you made. Don't you suppose Mad Lane'll kind of keep his eye open for a certain Mr. Kid? You plumb make me tired, kid, with such remarks." "I'm going," repeated the Frio Kid without heat, "to go to Madison Lane's Christmas doings and kill him. I ought to have done it a long time ago. Why, Mex, just 2 weeks ago, I dreamed me and Rosita was married instead of her and him. We was living in a house, and I could see her smiling at me, and oh, hell, Mex, he got her, and I'll get him. Yes, sir, on Christmas Eve, he got her, and that's when I'll get him." "There's other ways of committing suicide," advised Mexican. "Why don't you go and surrender to the sheriff?" "I'll get him," said the kid. Christmas Eve fell as balmy as April. Perhaps there was a hint of faraway frostiness in the air, but it tingles like seltzer, perfumed faintly with late prairie blossoms and the mesquite grass. When night came, the 5 or 6 rooms of the ranch house were brightly lit. In one room was a Christmas tree, for the Lanes had a boy of 3, and a dozen or more guests were expected from the nearer ranches. At nightfall, Madison Lane called aside Jim Belcher and 3 other cowboys employed on his ranch. "Now, boys," said Lane, "keep your eyes open. Walk around the house and watch the road well. All of you know the Frio Kid, as they call him now, and if you see him, open fire on him without asking any questions. I'm not afraid of his coming around, but Rosita is. She's been afraid he'd come in on us every Christmas since we were married." The guests had arrived in buckboards and on horseback and were making themselves comfortable inside. The evening went along pleasantly. The guests enjoyed and praised Rosita's excellent supper, and afterward the men scattered in groups about the rooms or on the broad gallery, smoking and chatting. The Christmas tree, of course, delighted the youngsters, and above all were they pleased when Santa Claus himself, in magnificent white beard and furs, appeared and began to distribute the toys. "It's my papa," announced Billy Sampson, age 6. "I've seen him wear 'em before." Berkeley, a sheepman, an old friend of Lane's, stopped Rosita as she was passing by him on the gallery, where he was sitting smoking. "Well, Mrs. Lane," he said, "I suppose by this Christmas you've gone over being afraid of that fellow McRoy, haven't you? Madison and I have talked about it, you know." "Very nearly," said Rosita, smiling. "But I am still nervous sometimes. I shall never forget that awful time when he came so near to killing us." "He's the most cold-hearted villain in the world," said Berkeley. "The citizens all along the border ought to turn out and hunt him down like a wolf." "He has committed awful crimes," said Rosita, "but I don't know. I think there is a spot of good somewhere in everybody. He was not always bad. That I know." Rosita turned into the hallway between the rooms. Santa Claus, in muffling whiskers and furs, was just coming through. "I heard what you said through the window, Mrs. Lane," he said. "I was just going down in my pocket for a Christmas present for your husband, but I've left one for you instead. It's in the room to your right." "Oh, thank you, kind Santa Claus," said Rosita brightly. Rosita went into the room while Santa Claus stepped into the cooler air of the yard. She found no one in the room but Madison. "Where is my present that Santa said he left for me in here?" she asked. "I haven't seen anything in the way of a present," said her husband, laughing, "unless he could have meant me." The next day, Gabriel Rad, the foreman of the XO Ranch dropped into the post office at Loma Alta. "Well, the Frio kid's got his dose of lead at last," he remarked to the postmaster. "Is that so? How'd it happen?" "One of old Sanchez's Mexican sheep herders did it. Think of it. The Frio kid killed by a sheep herder. The greaser saw him riding along past his camp about 12 o'clock last night and was so scared up that he up with a Winchester and let him have it. Funniest part about it was that the kid was dressed up all with white Angora skin whiskers and a regular Santa Claus rig out from head to foot. Think of the Frio kid playing Santa." The end.
Thank you for joining Fourth Wall for its first episode of Holiday Story Time. I don't have to tell you that my favorite pastime is giving, and Fourth Wall wanted to give you these wonderful stories for free as a thank you for your generosity and kindness over the years. They were able to do it because of the generous sponsorship of the Liberty Group. Thank you, Liberty Group. What a wonderful way to get on my nice list. We hope you will share your kindness with everyone you meet in every way you can during the holiday season, whether by giving what you can or just sharing a smile and a kindness to warm somebody's heart. We'll see you next week for 2 more stories, but in the meantime, remember, being nice is sometimes the greatest gift of all. Good night. We'll see you next week for more Holiday Story Time. Oh. Good.